What if I told you that right now, at this very moment, there are people walking among us who believe, with absolute conviction, that they are already dead? Or others who look at their loved ones and see only imposters wearing familiar faces? The mind, that enigmatic labyrinth of neural pathways and electrical impulses, occasionally produces experiences so profoundly strange that they challenge our very understanding of what it means to be human. Welcome to Bizarre Mental Disorders, where we'll venture into the Shadowlands of human consciousness, those rare and bewildering conditions that exist at the far edges of neuropsychiatry. These disorders aren't merely clinical curiosities. They are windows into the fundamental mechanisms that construct our sense of self, our perception of reality, and our experience of existence. In the next 25 minutes, we'll explore conditions that distort identity, fracture reality, and manifest in behaviors so peculiar they seem to belong more to the realm of fiction than medicine. Yet each disorder we'll discuss is documented in scientific literature, studied in clinical settings, and experienced by real people trying to navigate a world that, to them, operates by entirely different rules. As we journey through these mysterious manifestations of mind, remember that what we perceive as bizarre ultimately reveals the intricate and fragile nature of consciousness itself, and perhaps how closer to these states we all are than we might comfortably admit. We begin our exploration with disorders that unravel the very foundation of existence, our sense of self. Few conditions illustrate this more dramatically than Cotard syndrome, also hauntingly known as walking corpse syndrome. Imagine awakening one morning with the unshakable conviction that you are dead. Not metaphorically, not philosophically, but literally deceased, a walking corpse. Your body feels hollow, your organs rotting, your very existence a paradoxical impossibility. This is the baffling reality for those with Cotard syndrome. First described by French neurologist Jules Cotard in 1880, this rare condition manifests as the delusion of being dead, non-existent, or having lost one's blood or internal organs. In severe cases, patients may believe they have lost their soul or are eternally damned. The neurological basis appears to involve dysfunction in brain regions responsible for emotional response and recognition, particularly the fusiform gyrus and amygdala. When these areas disconnect from areas processing sensory information, patients may experience a profound sense of detachment from themselves, interpreted by the mind as literal non-existence. Consider the perplexing case of a 53-year-old woman who insisted she had died of kidney failure. Despite all evidence to the contrary, including her ability to speak about her supposed death, she remained convinced her body was putrefying. She stopped eating, believing dead people had no need for sustenance. Only after treatment with electroconvulsive therapy and antipsychotic medication did she gradually reconnect with reality. What makes Cotard's so philosophically fascinating is that it represents perhaps the ultimate crisis of identity, the denial of one's own existence while simultaneously experiencing that existence. Equally bewildering is Capgras delusion, where patients become convinced that someone close to them, often a spouse, family member, or even a pet, has been replaced by an identical imposter. Imagine looking at your partner of 20 years and recognizing their face perfectly, yet feeling with bone-deep certainty that the person before you is a sophisticated duplicate. The familiar face triggers no emotional response, creating a cognitive dissonance the brain resolves through the imposter explanation. Neurologically, Capgras appears to involve a disconnection between visual recognition systems and emotional response. You recognize the face, visual processing intact, but feel no emotional connection to it, affective response disrupted. Our perception of reality relies on the brain's remarkable ability to construct a coherent world from sensory input. When this process falters, reality itself seems to warp and distort, as demonstrated in our next disorder, Alice in Wonderland syndrome. Named after Lewis Carroll's surreal masterpiece, this condition causes episodes where perception becomes profoundly distorted. Objects may appear dramatically smaller, micropsia, or larger, macropsia, than they actually are. The person's own body parts might seem to shrink or expand, creating a disorienting sense of disproportion reminiscent of Alice's fluctuating size in Wonderland. Interestingly, some researchers speculate that Lewis Carroll himself may have experienced this condition, as he suffered from migraines, a common trigger for these episodes. Other triggers include epilepsy, brain tumors, psychoactive drugs, and infections like Epstein-Barr virus. What makes this syndrome particularly fascinating is that patients retain insight. They know these perceptions aren't real, yet cannot stop experiencing them. Imagine watching your teacher's head balloon to twice its normal size while their voice sounds impossibly distant, all while you're fully aware it's a hallucination. This strange dichotomy between perception and knowledge creates a uniquely unsettling experience. Perhaps even more enigmatic is Folie, or madness of two, a shared psychosis where a delusion transfers from one person to another. Typically, a primary individual with a psychotic disorder influences a more susceptible person until they adopt the same delusions. Consider the haunting case of twin sisters Ursula and Sabina Eriksson, who made headlines in 2008. While traveling together, they experienced a shared psychotic episode so intense it led them to run into traffic on a busy highway, seemingly believing they were being pursued by malevolent forces. The bizarre behavior culminated in tragedy when Sabina, days later, murdered a man who had offered her shelter, claiming she was fleeing from kidnappers. Social isolation often plays a critical role in Folie, creating a closed environment where reality goes unchecked by outside perspectives. The condition challenges our understanding of how reality is socially constructed and how permeable the boundaries between individual minds can become. Another fascinating distortion of reality occurs in reduplicative paramnesia, where patients believe a place has been duplicated and exists in two or more locations simultaneously. A person might insist they're in Hospital A, while acknowledging they're also in Hospital B, the same hospital somehow existing in two different places. This disorder typically follows damage to the right hemisphere of the brain, particularly the frontal and parietal lobes involved in spatial mapping and memory integration. The brain, unable to reconcile conflicting information about location, creates a duplicate to resolve the contradiction. In one documented case, a patient maintained that his hospital room in Boston was actually in his hometown hundreds of miles away. When questioned about the Boston skyline visible from his window, he explained that his hometown had been perfectly rebuilt to resemble Boston, a less cognitively taxing explanation for his brain than reconciling the conflicting location data. Now we turn to disorders manifesting in bewildering behaviors and compulsions, beginning with perhaps the most cinematically fascinating, alien hand syndrome. Imagine watching in horror as your own hand reaches for objects, unbuttons your clothing, or even strikes you, all without your intention or control. This is the unsettling reality for those with alien hand syndrome, where one hand seems to possess a will entirely its own. This condition typically occurs after surgery separating the brain hemispheres, corpus callosotomy, or following damage to the corpus callosum, the bundle of nerve fibers connecting the brain's two halves. Without this crucial communication channel, the brain hemispheres can act independently, with the non-dominant hand, usually the left, operating outside conscious control. Patients report their rogue hand performing complex, purposeful movements, grabbing food off someone else's plate, removing clothing in public, or even attempting to choke them while they sleep. Some describe the experience as having a foreign entity controlling their limb or feeling like an unwanted passenger has taken up residence in their body. The condition provides a remarkable window into the brain's compartmentalized nature and raises profound questions about the unity of consciousness. If part of my body can act with apparent intention outside my control, what does this reveal about the nature of free will and the self? Equally perplexing, though culturally specific, is Coro syndrome, a disorder characterized by the intense, panic-inducing belief that one's genitals are retracting into the body and will disappear, resulting in death. Predominantly reported in Southeast Asia, Coro often manifests as epidemic outbreaks, with numerous cases appearing simultaneously within a community. During these episodes, affected individuals may attach weights or clamps to their genitals or have family members physically hold them to prevent the perceived retraction. What makes Koro particularly fascinating to anthropologists and psychologists is its nature as a culture-bound syndrome, a condition largely incomprehensible outside its specific cultural context. The fear resonates with traditional Chinese medicine concepts regarding balance and life essence, demonstrating how cultural frameworks shape even our most visceral experiences of psychological distress. Our final behavioral anomaly is foreign accent syndrome, a rare condition where individuals suddenly begin speaking their native language with a foreign accent following brain injury. A native English speaker from Oregon might awaken from surgery speaking with what sounds to others like a Scottish brogue, despite never having visited Scotland or been exposed to the accent. The change results from subtle alterations in articulation, intonation, and speech rhythms caused by damage to speech production areas of the brain. Consider the case of an American woman who, following a severe migraine, began speaking with what sounded to others like a British accent. Her vowels elongated, her R's softened, and her prosody, the musical pattern of speech, transformed entirely. Though she had no control over these changes, they fundamentally altered how others perceived her identity, creating a profound sense of disconnection from her sense of self. What makes this condition particularly fascinating is that the accent isn't truly an established accent at all, but rather a pattern of speech distortions that happens to approximate what listeners perceive as a particular accent based on their own cultural exposure. As we've journeyed through these labyrinthine disorders of mind, certain philosophical questions emerge with unsettling clarity. If our sense of self, our perception of reality, and even our control over our own bodies can be so fundamentally disrupted by subtle changes in neural functioning, what does this reveal about the nature of consciousness itself? Perhaps most profoundly, these disorders suggest that our experience of being a unified, continuous self inhabiting an objective reality is itself a construction, an elaborate narrative crafted moment by our brains. When the machinery falters, the illusion breaks down in ways that reveal the complex systems normally operating beneath our awareness. Current research into these conditions employs advanced neuroimaging technologies like functional MRI and diffusion tensor imaging to map the precise neural circuits involved. Treatments range from pharmacological interventions targeting specific neurotransmitter systems to innovative approaches like transcranial magnetic stimulation, which can modulate activity in targeted brain regions. Yet ethical questions abound. If someone with Cotard's syndrome genuinely believes they're dead, is it ethical to convince them otherwise? If a person with Capgras sees their spouse as an imposter, does respecting their reality mean acknowledging the delusion? These questions challenge our conventional understanding of therapeutic goals and patient autonomy. We've only scratched the surface of the mind's mysterious malfunctions, those rare windows into the machinery of consciousness. From the existential horror of believing oneself dead while still walking and talking, to the bewildering experience of watching one's hand act with apparent autonomy, these disorders reveal the astonishing complexity of what we too often take for granted, our sense of self and reality. Perhaps what makes these conditions so simultaneously fascinating and unsettling is not their strangeness, but their familiarity. They represent not alien states, but exaggerations of experiences we all encounter: the momentary dissociation, the fleeting failure to recognize a familiar face, the occasional sense that our surroundings have somehow changed in indefinable ways. In the end, these bizarre disorders remind us of a humbling truth. The seamless experience of being a self moving through a stable world is not a given, but an achievement, a magnificent construction of our neural architecture that can, under certain conditions, unravel in ways both terrifying and illuminating. As you leave this lecture, I invite you to consider: how solid is your own reality? How unified your sense of self? And what might lie beyond the horizons of ordinary consciousness that these extraordinary conditions allow us to glimpse? Thank you for venturing with me into the Shadowlands of the mind. Next time, we'll explore the equally mysterious phenomenon of déjà vu and jamais vu, those uncanny moments when the familiar becomes strange and the strange becomes familiar.